Okay, so what I've done here is gather a few shots, a few breakdowns, VFX breakdowns that you can find online on YouTube. I particularly like a lot those from MPC and Industrial Light and Magic. I think they really show a lot of very interesting stuff. And so I'm going to try to break down a few of the shots. The goal here is to see how those shots are made to cover a few of the different workflows they used. And then I will stop and explain some of those workflows. So I'm doing this so you guys can really train yourself to understand and determine what workflow is going to be the best for your shot. So this is something that you will really need to learn to do is analyze the shot, the camera move, and understand how you're going to approach this. You're going to need to be able to say, okay, if this is going to be full CG, then from this line up there, it's going to be full 2D matte painting projected, and the background is going to be this. Because as we previously saw in the chapter about the workflows, you have so much different types of workflows and softwares that it's really going to be important if you're able to decide what workflow is going to be the most suitable for your given shot. So I think we can start by this shot that is really awesome from The Martian, so done by MPC. So in this case, what they did is shot an actual plate like the one you see here. So I believe this was shot in Jordan. It's a really cool location that you can also see in Prometheus, for example. So in this case, they do have a live action plate that is shot. But what they do is that they need to extend this using matte painting techniques. So what you would usually do for something like this is take one frame, do a paint over, then project it onto basic geometry like you can see here. This is the wireframe then for the proxy geometry into which your matte painting is gonna be projected onto. And this is really useful to see because as you can see, the geometry is really simple. When you do camera projection, it is really forgiving. You don't need to have a super complex piece of geometry. And I will explain exactly what are camera projections right after the breakdowns. But then, yeah, so you have here your live action plate and you're gonna do a paint over. In this case, you will see that they're going to add those background mountains. In this case, I believe those background mountains come from 2D elements, so from photos, but if you're more comfortable, for example, sculpting rocks, you can also do that, and I do it as well. But the point is that it's 2D projected matte painting, so it's not like a CG animation. And here you can clearly see those background mountains. I do believe those are just 2D elements, even though, as I said, it could be a mountain scan or whatever. But those other like smaller elements, you can clearly see that those are probably simply Photoshop layers. So you would take one frame, do the paint over, break it down into the useful layers, then project all that into really basic geometry. In this case, it would probably be simply cards. And there's also some clouds added into the sky. And other than that, you pretty much have it. You just add the grade and you have it. So really simple setup. And I chose this breakdown from MPC because I think it shows a lot of the same process all over again, which is very often like starting from a live action plate, extend it using like simple 2D matte painting techniques and simple projection. So that is a really cool breakdown to look at in order to understand a part of the process that we're going to use. Because in my case, for this particular course, I'm going to use this type of technique combined with also other types of more advanced CG techniques that I'm going to show right after. But this is a really cool breakdown to look to understand this thing about extending a plate, whether it's a live action plate or a CG plate, by the way, using 2D matte painting techniques. So this is not really useful though. Those tornadoes typically would come from effects. It's still cool to look at, but typically you wouldn't do something like that. Still pretty cool to see the final comp. Same again for here. So you have the live action plate. You can clearly see where it stops. You have the green screen. And as a matte painter, you would be given one frame of this because it's a really small camera move. So you would just be given one frame. You bring it into Photoshop and you paint your matte painting. You can clearly see the different layers here. And you send it back to comp and they will comp it properly into the shot. So same process for here. You can clearly see where the live action plate stops. You have the green screens with all the markers. I do believe they have also a 3D scanned version of the live action plate. You can see the CG on the left. But as a matte painter, you probably wouldn't worry about that. Yeah, this is a scan, a lighter scan of the the plate. So when you work on a film, in the layout, you would also be given quite often those scans. So this is a really good, I would say, reference. And then you would extend it as previously seen, just using Photoshop. And this is another really clear example. So once again, you have the live action plate, you take one frame, you extend it in Photoshop, and you send back the matte painting to comp, who will comp it. Or you can comp it yourself. Also, it really depends on the pipeline. It really depends. Same stuff here, really simple setup, live action plate, paint over, send it back to comp. So the next one, I believe, is a bit more complex. I mean, it's really, as a matte painter, it's still the same stuff. So just probably 2D stuff, but here you can see there's a lot of effects that it's comped over it. So typically you wouldn't care about the effects. As I said, the smoke sim and stuff like that. I mean, if you can do some, cool. But if you're like in a VFX pipeline inside of a studio, typically you wouldn't take care of such complex smoke simulations. However, you would provide those 2D matte painting elements, as you can see here, that are clumped in between those effects. But overall, it's still pretty much the same process. And the same for here. Still cool to see because this one is a night shot, and you can see how the grade plays quite a big role into selling this nighttime look. I like this one as well because you can clearly see here that the work is really minimal. It is just extending this plate a little bit, so this is maybe 1 hour. 1 hour of work, something like that. Something really simple, and that is also what matte painting is. This is another awesome one. So in this case, not a live action plate, but a full CG and matte painting shot. Here you have the background matte painting that you would provide. Then the CG would be comped in along with the effects, some comp work for dust and stuff like that, and then you have your final shot. Okay, last one, same, really simple process here. So live action plate, and you extend it in Photoshop, project it back into Nuke, and it's done. Now, those shots here are from the movie called Bird Box, and this is done by Industrial Light and Magic, and I really like those because those show pretty much the same approach when it comes to taking a live action plate and extending them with matte painting, except that here a lot of the elements come from actually CG renders and not 2D matte painting. I'm sure there's a bit of 2D matte painting here and there, but from what I see here, from what I understand, there's a lot of CG. Now, obviously all those trees that are moving are completely CG animated, but you also have a lot of elements that are modeled, textured, and rendered in CG, like this house, for example, here. But then it's comped in the shot as a projection, or it could. I actually don't know if it is in this case. I'm just saying that it could. In the end, it doesn't really matter because you can do it however you want. But here you can see, for example, you have some stuff that is projected onto really basic geometry like cards. So it's really the same stuff as we've seen in the Martian breakdown. So except that in this case, instead of using elements that are created into Photoshop, we create matte painting elements that are created in CG renders. And you can also overpaint those. So the reason I'm showing this because this shows one of the other really important techniques that we're going to use. So it's camera projections, but using CG renders instead of just photo elements. In what we are going to do, we're going to combine everything. So we're going to combine using like purely 2D matte painting projected, but also CG renders projected. And we'll also do a bit of pure CG environment and animation.